Good evening from Israel, where many people suspected that the final steps on the path to a ceasefire would not be straightforward, and so it has proved. The optimism of yesterday that the agreement to stop the fighting in Gaza would be signed, sealed and delivered by the Israeli cabinet this morning was punctured when its meeting was pushed back to tomorrow. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had accused Hamas of backtracking on part of the agreement. But American officials say they are very confident the ceasefire will begin on schedule on Sunday. In the meantime, Israel is keeping up its attacks on what it says are Hamas targets in Gaza right up to the wire. More than 70 Palestinians are reported to have been killed since the ceasefire deal was announced, including women and children. Well, I'll be joined here in Jerusalem in a moment by Emma, our international editor, and from Tel Aviv by John, our senior international correspondent. Tonight in Tel Aviv and towns and cities across Israel, there is uncertainty about just when the Israeli cabinet will sign off on the deal. Across the Israel-Gaza border, war-weary Palestinians are fearful more airstrikes are to come.
This may look like a new dawn for Gaza, but in fact it's an Israeli airstrike early today. After Gazans celebrated the ceasefire news, reality came crashing down in the form of a heavy bombardment, a bludgeoning reminder this war is not over yet. These seasoned ambulance crews are all too familiar with how to get people out from under the rubble. On this occasion, they rescued a baby. They got out another child who also appeared to be okay, but was taken to hospital just in case. Other people caught up in the bombings were not so fortunate. This grieving man pleaded with his dead sister. The Hamas-run health ministry has reported dozens of fatalities since the deal in Doha was announced. Many women and children have been injured or killed. It seems the countdown to Sunday is going to be a bloody one. I woke up to an airstrike hitting my house. It felt like an earthquake. My wife and two daughters were killed, said this man. Just look at the devastation. 27 of our neighbours lost their lives, said another. Even by the standards of the deadliest war ever fought by Israel and the Palestinians, these air raids looked cynically vengeful and excessive. The Baptist Hospital in Gaza City has been dealing with many of the injured and the dead.
Despite declaration of ceasefire declaration, the Israeli Defense Army deliberates bombing innocent peoples, leading to massive amounts of martyrs and injuries. And so we are so surprised why they are doing that.
The airstrikes happened in northern Gaza, where the Israelis are attacking several districts for the third time since the war began. They're doing so because Hamas keep on making localized comebacks. A year ago, I was standing on this spot to report on fighting in exactly the same areas in northern Gaza. The problem for the Israelis is that Hamas keep returning to neighborhoods that were previously conquered by the IDF, who then left. The conclusion being drawn is that this war is on a loop, making it both perpetual and unwinnable. If all goes well, the tragic cycle will be broken on Sunday, making these some of the last fatalities. Gazans believe that relief is in sight, but it's still just out of reach. John Irvine, News at 10, Tel Aviv.
Well, the blame game over Israel delaying its approval for the ceasefire deal has been going on all day. Families of Israeli hostages are desperate for it to go ahead, but others are still angrily opposed, saying it shouldn't until Hamas has been destroyed once and for all.
There is a deal in principle, but not yet in practice. And tonight, families of those missing in Gaza rallied in Tel Aviv, demanding the deal be enacted quickly to avoid the loss of more hostages. The Israeli government has still not voted to approve the ceasefire agreement, accusing Hamas of reneging on crucial parts of the deal. 24 hours on, those issues may now be resolved, but for the families, each delay risks more lives.
The deal that we're having is the same deal that we had on the table in May. The only thing that's changed is that some of the hostages were killed in captivity, just like my cousin. She was alive in May. She should have been a part of this deal. She should have been one of the first to come home in this deal, but they didn't sign it in time. She was murdered, and now we have the same deal, only less hostages.
Those on the right of government and society also have concerns about the deal, believing that without the complete destruction of Hamas, no deal should be agreed. This evening, Israel's far-right security minister Ben-Gvir threatened he and his party would resign should the ceasefire agreement be signed. The resignations would not bring down the government, but they would be damaging. Earlier, Prime Minister Netanyahu's spokesman told me of the painful choices to reach the deal.
Israel wants it to happen. Our negotiating team, they're in Doha right now. We're trying to get this across the line, but we are dealing with jihadists. This is not the Bank of England. When you make a deal with jihadists, it's a very, very difficult process. But that said, we're willing to pay a painful price to get our people home.
Hamas have claimed the deal as a victory over Israel, but the deal has been a long time coming, adding to the more than 47,000 Palestinian lives lost.
This deal should have been done a long time ago. Hamas has repeatedly agreed on all proposals basically presented, and Israel found a way to come about and not to execute or sign. But I believe with the incoming U.S. administration headed by Donald Trump, I think the equation is different, and Israel is pressured into not sabotaging the deal this time around.
There are 3 nights and 2 days left until the ceasefire will be implemented. How long those days and nights must feel now. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Jerusalem.
Well, central to the deal, of course, is the return of the dozens of Israeli hostages. We saw some of the posters of them there in Emma's report. Out of 250 people taken during the October 7th attacks, 98 remain unaccounted for. Deaths have been reported, but without a body, and false reports of executions. Families are still waiting desperately for their return. One of them is Oded Lifshitz. He was taken with his wife Yocheved from Kibbutz Nir Oz. The couple were peace activists and regularly transported patients from Gaza to receive medical treatment in hospitals across Israel. On October the 23rd, his wife was released along with another captive, but no one has heard about Mr. Lifshitz since. Liri Albag, just 18 when she was taken from Nahal Oz, was last heard from earlier in the month when Hamas released a video of her looking visibly distressed. Another is Or Levy. He witnessed his wife's murder before being captured. They were at the Nova Music Festival and took refuge in a shelter before Hamas set off a grenade and took him, leaving behind a young son. And Emily Damari, a 28-year-old British Israeli who was taken from her home in southern Israel. The gunmen shot and wounded her and killed her dog before taking her to Gaza. Well, I'm joined now by Emma, who's been reporting on this throughout this week and for far longer too, of course, across the whole of this terrible period. Just what are the obstacles with just days to go, Emma, of this deal being approved?
Well, The main obstacle seems to be some of the names that Hamas wanted to see on the list of those approved prisoners that were going to be released from Israeli custody. There seemed to be quite an issue over that, although it wasn't an issue that seemed to be carrying the same weight for the Americans. They described it as a loose end that needed to be tidied up, whereas here in Israel the government was very much making it sound like this was a very, very serious issue that could jeopardize the whole thing. I think it would be not unfair to assume that potentially this was an opportunity for Prime Minister Netanyahu to start to distract from the mood music here, from the criticism of him by the hostage families, and also the criticism that has come from the right wing of his own government.
Okay, Emma, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, we can join John now in Tel Aviv, and some truly terrible images in your report earlier, John. Real fears tonight in Gaza that there are more airstrikes on the way before any ceasefire comes.
Yes, Julie, I can tell you we've just been listening to more Israeli jets heading south. Since this ceasefire announcement was made, this deal announcement was made yesterday afternoon, reports suggest 81 people in Gaza have been killed by Israeli airstrikes and shelling. That's a truly shocking figure, and there are still 2.5 days until the ceasefire comes into effect. The people of Gaza know it's coming, but they don't know if they're going to live to see it. Phase 1 envisages over a 6-week period 33 of the 98 Israeli hostages being set free in return for the release of 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. Now, the proposals for phases 2 and 3 are rather vague. It's as if the mediators decided to focus all their attention on phase 1 in the belief that if it went well, the other phases would naturally follow on. But I think that's rather doubtful. The last time there was a lull here, Julie, way back in November 2023, people were hopeful, of course, but that truce broke down after just a week. There are plenty in Mr. Netanyahu's cabinet who are itching to get back to war after 6 weeks. And the only way this becomes a durable peace is if the Trump administration really keeps up the pressure. If that doesn't happen, there's a real danger. It will just be a 6-week break in the fighting.